had your chance. Well, thank you, Carol, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak tonight, and thanks also to Yes Kelty for moving this event from the original plan was to have it last night, but of course that would have clashed with the television debate, and we'd have hated to have missed that, wouldn't we? Obviously I sat down and watched. Anyone who else saw it? Yeah. I found it really uncomfortable viewing. And then I was trying to think, what did this remind me of? And in the end, it was no less than, a couple of pit bulls or fighting cocks put in a ring. These were two men who were programmed to clash. And if we ever thought we were going to learn anything from it, we were mistaken. And how foolish were we? So yeah, depressing. I was cheered by the news today, though, that Boris Johnson is going to stand for Westminster, because that means that he could be the next Conservative Prime Minister, and I can't think of a more compelling reason to vote yes. So I'm really cheered by that. For me, the high point of last night's debate was that golden moment when Alistair Darling, the well-known stand-up comedian, was explaining the concept of a joke to Alex Salmond. The trouble is, now, we don't know when Better Together are joking. And so the extra powers that the unionist parties set forward yesterday, it was kind of lost in translation, but they did have a press conference and they said there would be more powers for Scotland if we voted no. And none of them agree with what they'll be. But will Westminster have the last laugh if Labour's new power of tax raising means that Scotland has to raise its own tax to fill the gap left by the reduction, massive reduction probably, in the block grant that we normally get. So, yeah, who's joking? It's very difficult, isn't it, throughout all of this, and clearly people at the debate last night struggled, the undecided struggled to make up their minds through everything they heard, and I don't blame them. Hi folks. And it is a matter of, do you listen to your heart or do you listen to your head? For me it's definitely both. My head tells me that all the arguments stack up, and I've tested them against my own reasoning, so far as that goes. I've really tried to think, is there a good reason to vote no in this? And I can't come up with one. And my heart tells me, from reporting for many years on environmental injustice around Scotland, I've seen what communities have had to put up with. I've seen, especially the old coal mining communities, some of the fishing communities, the communities that have really been dumped on, the ones that now live next to landfill. Of course, they often had deep mining and open cast preceding that. So these things tell me in my heart that we have to change the way we live. And that's why I speak at these events. The starting point for making that change is to bring government closer to home. And I think most people would agree that at whichever level you look at it, be it national, local government, looking at our local authorities, or community councils, we feel a bit remote from all of them. You're very lucky, I come from Scotland, well, not far from here, you're very lucky if there's more than sort of 2 men and a dog turn up to the community council meetings, and the community councillors put in hours and hours of work for no great achievement because they don't have many powers. If you're a local councillor, on your local authority, say Fife Council, the statistics show that you're doing an awful lot of work for not a lot of reward. And the statistics are that there is one councillor for every 4,000 people in Scotland. That compares to one for every 400 in Germany, and 1 to 125 in France. I've no idea how they cope. They must spend their whole lives at meetings and doing government. But the point is, it brings government at all these levels closer to home, and you feel you've got a bit more control over your lives. Now, one of the reasons people say they're undecided or they're going to vote no is because they're scared of change, which is a very human reaction, isn't it? But change is inevitable. In all sorts of ways. There's an example which I sometimes use, and at last I'm in the one place I can use it which requires no explanation. Because my husband, who's flitting around some ways over there, is from Kelty, and he remembers in the days when he was growing up in the 50s, that the smog was so thick here, and you'll tell from my accent, I'm not from Kelty, but the smog was so thick here that his mother had to walk in front of the car with a torch to light the way. Now, my kids grew up in Scotland, and they used to play down in Loch Meadows. And Dave, my husband, says in his day, Loch Meadows was where all the polluted mine water was put, and it was absolutely horrible and nobody went there. My kids only know it as a place to windsurf and walk the dog. So that has changed within one generation. And I think it underlines very graphically that change is going to happen. They're already talking about automated cars on the roads, driverless cars, and firing tourists into space. So that could just be within the next generation. We can't imagine how it's going to be, but we can take control of it. And as I see it, that means having total control of government within Scotland. We also, and here Bill already previewed in a sense, I was going to say we need to get the environment right. First and foremost, that's where I come from. We've got to get our natural resources right, we've got to use them properly. If we get those right, then what follows is better health and a robust economy. What we have at the moment is the very opposite. We have an economy driven by the southeast of England, whose values are very different, whose keystone is the City of London, bankers, their bonuses and all the rest of it. Everything else, however far you go in Scotland, everything else that happens, everything else to do with our environment is driven by that. It is to serve that. It is to serve the profit margin. Nothing wrong with money, there's nothing wrong with profits, but we can't have everything going that way. It needs to be brought closer to home. And it's a broken financial system. And that's what we're continually worried about mending this broken financial system, but we should be concerned about creating better jobs, more diverse economy, more security for workers here. But we don't control enough of the stuff that matters. And that's from farming to fishing, tax, of course, defence, and energy. That's the areas that I tend to look at. So on farming, we have, as you know, no direct voice in Europe. The latest reforms, which have been negotiated through Westminster on our behalf, will put Scottish farmers at the very, very bottom of the heap, getting the lowest subsidies out of the whole of Europe by 2019. At the moment, it's always been run by a rich and powerful lobby, but the gainers in this system are the people who are already very rich. So I'm afraid it's landowners like our dear royal family. They're the ones that gain, in fact the royals gained to the tune of about £500,000 a year, euros I should say, euros a year, through the current system. And you only have to look at the land and what's happened to the environment to see the consequences of paying for intensive farming, intensive agriculture. We've lost a huge amount of wildlife. As an example, just up the road in Angus, where all the fruit farms are, where they have to import bumblebees from Europe because we have destroyed bumblebee habitat in this country. That tells me that we have knackered our environment here. So what we see here is money going into big farms where hedges are ripped out, where trees are taken out, so that they can have wall-to-wall crops right across the landscape. And then you see in many places around here, poor bits of land which would benefit from drainage, but they don't get it because the money goes to the richer farmers. The final straw actually was at the end of last year, when Brussels actually noticed that Scotland's farmers had historically been under-subsidised and said, we're going to make up for this by offering you £200 million a year. And DEFRA said, thank you very much, and they divided it up amongst the whole of the UK's farmers. Just while we're talking about land, on land reform, I think it's well worth underlining that we have 19 million acres in Scotland and 5.5 million people. 2/3 of the privately held rural land in Scotland is owned by just 1,200 people. That's about 1/6 of the population of Kelty, owning 2/3 of the privately held land. It is the biggest concentration of land ownership in Europe. And why don't we shout about it? Because we've sort of just grown used to it and just grown used to being helpless, I think. Scottish Greens put forward the idea of a land value tax to give a more realistic value to land, to break up this massive concentration, to end land banks, to bring an end to the boom and bust to housing, and we would use this tax to pay for public services. It angers me that we've got these big landowners, and then we've got the next generation, our kids, struggling to get mortgages on the tiniest of homes. So offshore, looking to fish. Okay, we don't have a voice in Europe on fish either. We were sold down the river and out to sea and everywhere you like to think of when we joined Europe, and Westminster gave up the 200-mile exclusive fishing zone. So that's gone. But we need to listen to our fishermen. They haven't always been squeaky clean, but they do know their own seas better than anyone else. There was a very graphic example out in the North Sea on the Wee Bankie. I don't know if anyone remembers the battles over the Wee Bankie. I was caught up as a media observer in the big clashes between the Danish trawlermen and the Greenpeace protesters. Because what they were doing, the Danes had been given by Europe the right to take the sand eels in massive, massive industrial quantities. And the Fife fishermen said if they do that, that's what the haddock eat. We won't have any haddock to catch. They were right. There's no haddock landed at Pittenweem anymore. The vans that come from Pittenweem now bring haddock landed much further north, Aberdeen and so forth. So we need to listen, and I do believe that a fisheries quotas negotiated by Scotland, we have the bulk of the industry after all in Scotland, it's not in England, but negotiated here for our fishermen, by our fishermen, will be respected by our fishermen, and by golly, they will be closely scrutinised by our government here. The food industry will be more important than ever to an independent Scotland, and is crucial, underlying that, to have a clean environment. As Bill has touched on, we need to look at the threats to our environment. And my goodness, over the years I have reported on so many pollution episodes, especially radioactive pollution. The Solway Firth is polluted from Sellafield. Just down the road here at Dalgety Bay, they're still trying to clean up the pollution left by radioactive aircraft dials, which the Ministry of Defence have been obdurate about dealing with that. The Ministry of Defence has also been very secretive about other pollution incidents and episodes. There was something came out last year where it turned out that they hadn't actually told Holyrood about a radioactive leak up at Dounreay, at the Vulcan reactor, naval reactor. It was scandalous. The residents of Couport were awakened by loud explosions. Now, if you live next to a nuclear bomb store and you're woken by loud explosions, that's a bit scary. But the Ministry of Defence had failed to warn them, and they've so far failed to explain what it was all about. And I just read at the weekend about 70 safety lapses involving the nuclear convoys that come between like Aldermaston down in Berkshire and the Faslane nuclear base. So, we need control over defence is all I'm saying. And off the back of that, looking at the nuclear side of things, we need control over our nuclear energy, or rather the lack of it. We need control over energy. And the Greens, of course, in the SNP will turn their back on nuclear and look at the huge range of other things that we've got, as well as subsidising local district heating schemes to get rid of the dominance of the big six. And how am I doing for time? I've got 2 minutes, I'm telling myself. Yeah. So I shall wind up. But we've got the North Sea oil out there. There's plenty down there. We shouldn't take it all because, as Bill rightly said, climate change is the biggest single threat to all our futures, actually. So we could extract, we reckon, about a third of it. And some of that money should go into the renewables because they've been severely underinvested in the past. So we could make the most of that. I remember an engineer, a very chief engineer from Scottish and Southern Energy, saying to me many years ago when we were just beginning to hear about wind turbines and they were being tried and tested in Scotland, he said, if we don't seize the moment now, the Danes are going to walk away with this industry. What next? So we need to get a grip, basically. I would also be in favour of total economic independence. It was painful, really, and I ended up tweeting about it last night, this Alistair Darling constantly asking Salmond what his plan B was about the currency. And I said, thank goodness My words might be stronger. Thank God the Scottish Greens have another plan, which is for our own currency. Because for the life of me, I can't see how you can run two separate economies. And of course, we want ours to be better and stronger and all the rest of it. You can't run two separate economies on one currency. So we have to make a gradual transition. Not overnight, that would be foolish, but we have to make a gradual transition. Can we afford it? No one's disputing that now. 9.9% of UK taxation goes to Westminster, 9.3% comes back from spending. That's including North Sea oil revenues, which I think is fair. What is our option? We can carry on doing the same thing year after year. We can carry on casting our votes in general elections and getting the same outcome being generally not getting the government we voted for. We've become institutionalised in Scotland, and I think it's really time we made a break of that. I agree totally with Bill. We've nothing to be afraid of. All we lack is courage. Thank you.